In the early 1920s, the Gruber family lived on the secluded Hinterkaifeck farm in rural Bavaria, Germany. The family consisted of 63-year-old Andreas Gruber, his 72-year-old wife Casilia, their 35-year-old daughter Victoria, and her two young children, 7-year-old Casilia and 2-year-old Joseph. The farm was isolated, surrounded by dense forests and rolling hills, far from the nearest town. Though isolated, strange things began happening on the farm that made the Grubers uneasy. Andreas Gruber reported unusual footprints in the snow leading from the nearby woods to his house, but they never seemed to lead back. Tools and hay went missing, and eerie noises came from the attic. Andreas even found strange footprints that seemed to lead to the house, but didn't continue onward, and he mentioned hearing sounds as though someone was living in the attic. Despite these oddities, Andreas didn't seem overly worried, but his family began noticing even more unsettling things. At one point, Andreas found a piece of paper in the house that appeared to be from someone hiding in the attic. The paper claimed that an unknown person had been living there for weeks. The family feared something sinister was lurking in their midst, but they couldn't figure out who or what it was. On March 31, 1922, after months of increasingly strange occurrences, Andreas Gruber went to the police to report the suspicious happenings. However, the authorities dismissed his concerns, believing them to be the ramblings of a paranoid man. The police did not take action, and the family continued living in fear. That night, something terrible happened. Sometime after midnight, someone, perhaps a person familiar with the family, entered the Gruber home. The family members were brutally murdered in their beds, one by one. Andreas, Casilia, Victoria, and the children were all killed in the most gruesome manner. The killer took their time, methodically executing each person in the house. It was clear that this was not a random act of violence, but a carefully planned and deliberate act of terror. The next morning, the maid who had been away on leave arrived at the farm. She was horrified to discover the bodies of the family lying lifeless in their beds, their faces frozen in terror. She immediately alerted neighbors, who called the authorities. The police arrived at the scene to investigate, but something about the crime scene was bizarre. Despite the gruesome killings, there was no sign of forced entry, and the house was locked from the inside. It appeared that the killer or killers had simply disappeared. The animals on the farm were left untouched, and there were no signs of a struggle in the barn. Strangely, the house showed evidence that someone may have spent several days there after the murders, with lights observed in the windows and footsteps echoing through the halls at night. The investigation was slow and methodical. The authorities searched the surrounding woods, but no solid evidence was found that could lead to the identity of the murderer. Despite numerous leads and theories, the case quickly turned into a haunting mystery that no one could solve. Several theories emerged about who could have committed the murders. One of the most prominent suspects was a former farmhand who had worked for the Grubers in the past and had a strained relationship with the family. He had reportedly been in the area around the time of the murders, but there was no definitive evidence linking him to the crime. Another theory suggested that the killer may have been someone Victoria had known from her past, possibly an ex-boyfriend with whom she had an unresolved relationship. However, despite the suspects and the ongoing investigation, no one could be definitively tied to the crime. A particularly chilling theory involved the idea that the killer may have been hiding in the attic for days before the murders. Perhaps the murderer had been living off the food and supplies in the house, quietly watching the family before striking. This theory added an eerie dimension to the case, as it implied that the killer had been silently lurking in the house, almost as if stalking the family. Despite all efforts to solve the case, the Hinterkaifeck murders remain unsolved to this day. In 1923, a man named Carl H. was briefly arrested after being seen acting suspiciously near the farm, but he was never charged with the murders, and he ultimately provided no significant leads. As time passed, the Hinterkaifeck farm was abandoned, and the once bustling farm fell into ruin. The case became a chilling legend, and rumors spread about ghostly sightings around the area. Locals claim to have seen figures in the windows of the decaying farmhouse, and some even reported hearing strange noises late at night, as though the house itself was haunted by the events that had taken place there. The farm remains a ruin to this day, and the murders continue to be one of Germany's most baffling and terrifying unsolved crimes. The story of Hinterkaifeck continues to fascinate and terrify people, and the chilling unanswered questions surrounding the crime keep it alive in the collective imagination. Who was the killer? And what kind of person could carry out such a horrific act and then vanish without a trace? The Hinterkaifeck murders serve as a reminder that sometimes, the most terrifying things in life are those that remain hidden in the shadows, never fully understood, and never truly explained. This division should help break the story down into more digestible parts, each with a distinct focus on key elements of the haunting case.